Hot stove conversations about baseball, history, football, and current events that may leave you saying there's more to consider. Now, here's your host, Jack Moore.
Hello, everyone, and again, I welcome you to More to Consider. I have a gentleman on today, Andy Semotiuk, who is an attorney. He has a law degree, or he is licensed in both the United States and in Canada, and he is an expert in immigration law. Clearly, coming out of the 2024 election and really the last decade in America, it has been a hot-button issue. What does all of this really mean? I have watched some of the videos of this gentleman. I think he gives a very even-handed and a lot of historical background into what we're really talking about with immigration in general. How does this affect Americans? How does it affect people that have come into America in different ways? Sir, really appreciate you being here. Please give me an introduction, any kind of background you want to get into and how you have come into this field.
Oh, great. Thanks
Yes, sir.
for having me on the program. I love to be here. And a little background about myself. I'm Canadian. I was born and raised in Canada, Edmonton, Alberta. That's a place where it's mighty cold in the minuses today. It's a place where you have to have a block heater in your car to be able to start in the morning. You have to plug it in and scrape the windows from the frost that had frozen on the windshields. And I spent my early youth there, grew up there, and then I spent a lot of time in the United States, in Los Angeles. And as it turns out, half my life has been in the United States and half of my life in Canada. So, for example, I practiced law in Los Angeles for 10 years, and I worked in New York for 5 years. And currently I work at Pace Law Firm in Toronto, doing U.S. and Canadian immigration.
Let me ask you this, because I'm just curious. When you say, I actually am helping a friend of mine coach girls softball in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and half of our team is from Canada. And they are the neatest young ladies and have the best time when they're like, well, back home it's negative 40 right now, all these kind of figures. How much of the year is it like that? Is it 6 months? Is it 6 weeks? Or just how bad does it get?
Well, it's a little bit better these days than it was when I was growing up. For example, I remember going to high school with a temperature of minus 53 below zero and blowing wind. It was so cold. I remember hearing trees crack because they were freezing, and if spit, the liquid would freeze before it hit the ground. It was that cold. And I remember days where, for example, for 3 weeks in a row, it would be minus 20 in the cold of winter. But luckily, it was only cold from late October until about April. That's the winter season.
Now, another thing I told the young ladies, the one thing I know about Celsius and Fahrenheit is they equal at negative 40. Because when they throw out the temperature, they're always talking Celsius, so we're still talking about super cold.
Yeah,
okay,
that is cold, I'll tell you.
Yes, sir.
You got to wonder. I'll just tell a little story. My daughter, who's going to high school, it was bitter cold, bitter cold. And she didn't have, the car wouldn't start. So she took her bike out and she went to the garage to get the bike, and someone had stolen the bike and left some puny little bike there in its place, strangely. So she took that puny bike and she had to ride it to school in bitter cold, like below 20 weather. And there was a test at school that day, and she cursed all the way to the school, and she couldn't ride the darn bike because it was no good. But that was her defining moment. That's when, it's,
that's
do you have grit or don't you? And it turned out she did. Yeah.
So in setting what we've talked about, it's now 2025. We're in the world that we're in. I did a little bit of looking, and, of course, there is an argument that in the United States of America, there were settlers, colonizers, whatever you want to call it. We have a Declaration of Independence in 1776, but not a constitution until 1787, and it goes into the ratification process. And sort of speaking off the top of my head, with some knowledge of constitutional law, when the United States government is set up, it's clearly set up with there's going to be a very narrow amount of U.S. jurisdiction from the federal levels. A lot of stuff, of course, it's all been turned on its head. The 14th Amendment has actually applied a lot of, like, the Bill of Rights to the states selectively through incorporation. So it does kind of look like it's saying that immigration and naturalization will be an aspect of the federal government. What does all that mean, and what does it mean today? So please tell me your background on that, and historically how we get to where we are now.
Well, I'm really glad that you're familiar with all that history. It's important. The essence of it is that immigration is a federal matter, so the federal government has to deal with it. And the bottom line is that Trump has identified the number one problem that seems to be eating America in terms of immigration. It's the southern border and illegals. They're called undocumented immigrants. And there's apparently about 11 million of them. I think probably there are even more. But whatever the number, maybe up to 20 million. But whatever the number is, these people are the principal concern related to immigration. Why are these people in the United States? And apparently a majority of people in the United States share that concern and feel that it would be, at least to some extent, I guess they agree that you have to deal with this problem and get these people home. But this is where the hub of the problem is. And the basic gist of the problem is this. Of those, let's say, 11 million people, about 1.5 million, according to Pew's surveys, are criminals. That is to say, murderers, rapists, drug dealers, whatever it is. And people who've been ordered deported and they haven't left, etc. That's the core group that's causing all the trouble in the U.S., including these murders and people who are attacking on boys. I doubt there's an American who would say, oh, no, let's save those people. Let's keep them here in the United States. I think everybody agrees. Those people have to go. We got to get them out. So that's where the consensus is. Now, in terms of how the administration is currently dealing with the rest of these people, that is to say, let's say 9.5 million, they are using the term quote-unquote criminal to describe those people as well. So when they say we have to deport all these criminals, these drug dealers that are bringing fentanyl into the United States and so on, they're misusing the term criminal to include these people who may be better described as people who have broken civil immigration law. That is to say, for example, came to the United States as a visitor and overstayed their visa, or were working and ran out of time on their work permit and they stayed, or students who were here and stayed, people such as that. So that's a civil offense. That is to say, a broken law, but it's not a criminal offense. There's no violence
victim
involved. There's no,
it's not victimizing another, right?
Yeah. So that's right. So the government, the administration, is using the term criminal to describe all these people, and therefore everybody's got to get out. That's the nub, I would say, of the problem in the way they're approaching it. And here's the reason why it's a problem in the way they're approaching it. The studies show that probably about 2/3 of these people have been in the United States for more than 10 years. 10 years they've been in the United States. They've had children here. They've married Americans here. They've, whatever it is. They've built up their equities here. That is to say, they paid taxes. They worked at jobs. They participated in community events, donated to charitable causes, etc. Now, I don't know about you, but I, for example, occasionally speed when I'm driving. That is, a breach of the law. And I've been caught for speeding and I've had to pay fines. I've parked illegally and
Mm-hmm.
I've been fined for parking illegal, etc. So it's not like I'm a saint and I can condemn everybody else because I've never done anything wrong. Uh, Now, okay, a speeding ticket may not be the same as someone coming to the U.S. and trying to stay forever here without, complying with the law. That may be more serious. But how much more serious is it? Do we distinguish from a murderer, rapist, killer, savage, beast, and someone who spent 10 years here, has raised a family here, has, devoted his life to America, albeit that he came in a wrongful manner in some way? Is there some different treatment that a person like that merits? Or do we just call them all criminals and send them all to Guantanamo Bay or wherever else they're going to package these people until they can be deported or dealt with in some way? And that's the crisis I think America faces, in that it's not a question about them. It's a question about us. Who are we as people? Like, is that really the way we want to be? Is that what we really want? Is that the kind of life that we, lead? Let he who is without sin, something along those lines.
We all have a lot of, I think,
some
anecdotal
adage to that
stories,
effect.
and I don't want to sound like the cliche guy saying this, but I have a number of friends who are from other parts of the world that I dearly loved. I remember being in D.C. a few years ago, and the cab driver was from some part of Africa. I remember, most beautiful guy, and man, I love America. Can't wait to get the rest of the family here. And it's kind of hard to find a D.C. cab driver that's not from some other part of the world. And he's one of God's children. I think he's a beautiful guy. I don't know what his status is, but I know he's out there making gainful employment. He's probably paying his taxes. So I do think a lot of Americans feel that way. Now, on the political side, I would defer to you on this judgment. I think you're exactly right that to simply be here and not have some legal documentation to be there is not the crime in the sense of a criminal act, again, with a victim where you've actually done some damage to property or person. And it is a civil matter. You're in some violation of still the law, but it wouldn't be in the criminal sense. It would be in the civil sense. I think what America, especially 25 years post 9/11, when the revelations came out that people were in our country, they were in gyms, they were members of this and that, and they were plotting to do some type of real terrorism in the United States. One of the things that I think has clearly come out, and I think it's been part of Trump's message, we don't know who the hell's been going across the border recently. We hear the stories of bad type of actors across the border sending people in, sometimes under bounties, sometimes, they've paid this amount of money to cross. So there seems to be an ugliness in that. I also wonder, though, kind of as
Oh yeah.
armchair American watching all this, Trump, I don't think, is super precise with the language, never has been. There is a lot of spitballing. There is a lot of, I think, talking to Joe Q American in a language maybe he hears. And I wondered all along, has there been the let's cast the big net, let's make Americans think we're going to clean out all these people and then pivot back to let's get rid of the ones that are really dangerous. Let's get rid of the one. I think that might be where this is going, because while I think Americans are loving of people from all over, because God knows we all have histories that go somewhere else generally. So given that history and our sensitivity to that,
Yeah.
I don't think it was, we clearly see it with the election, the message of something has to be done because we don't know what the hell's coming across the border, how dangerous it is. That's a scary proposition. And with the previous administration, not to be too much, of an editorial against the last administration, but it didn't seem like people really knew what the hell was happening. And it almost seemed on purpose. It seemed purposeful that you don't have any control of the border and shut up, stay in your lane, don't speak on it because we're in charge and we'll let who we want to cross and you'll suffer whatever consequence from that. So has there been an overshift? You know, politically, there's always an overshift. There's too far to the other side. And then that gives you some leeway to work back. Do you
Yeah.
think it's possible that, in fact, what the Trump administration is really trying to do is go after those that we can identify as criminal first?
Yeah, okay. I like your thought. I think it's a good thought, but I'm afraid from what I see that we're far beyond that in terms of what's going
You
on
think
in
it's a move
America
to get
today.
everybody out?
I
Okay.
don't want it. Yeah, it's disheartening. It's like I wish and I hope you're right. I would love to see that. You know, that's sort of like a strategy, right? Like it's like a political strategy of doing what
Right.
you want, but demanding more so you can end up where you want to end up. And
Well, that's kind of the art of the
I'm all
deal,
for
too.
ending up
That's
where you
kind
want
of
to
been
end up.
Trump's whole thing. You ask for the whole cake and you end up with half, and you got exactly what you were after.
Yeah, yeah. But that's a goodwill
Mm-hmm.
view of what Trump is doing. But I'm concerned about. Look, why am I concerned? There are
Mm-hmm.
people in Guantanamo Bay. Now,
Right.
these guys may be exactly who should be there, but what are they doing in Guantanamo Bay? Why aren't they in the courts here in the United States? There are people being rounded up who are citizens and who are now being held in custody, including
Mm-hmm.
even Native American, like Native Indian Americans who have been rounded up. There are there's construction of camps in certain parts of the United States, apparently for the purpose of housing upcoming
Now, this is all post January
rounded up
20th?
individuals.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. So, and there are like these
Mm-hmm.
proclamations that are being passed. There's this overreach in terms of proclamations. Now, they may not all be just in immigration. They're broader. An example is the tariffs that are being imposed on steel and aluminum and on Canada and on Mexico and on China. Maybe in some cases China, possibly there's good reason for it. I don't believe the tariffs, which are going to be 50% on Canada, are merited for the reason stated. The reason stated is Canada is sending in illegals into the United States and is a source of fentanyl. But I wrote an article about this because I researched it for Forbes, and like it's Mickey Mouse compared to what's going on in Mexico. Like I think that in an entire year there were something like 48 pounds of fentanyl that came in from Canada, and there was like 27,000 pounds or whatever it is. It's in the article from Mexico. So it's less than 1% of all the fentanyl that's come in from the world came in from Canada. But the argument is, well, Canada's, and actually the reality is just the opposite, that the Americans are likely going to be flooding Canada more than Canadians flooding the U.S. illegally, especially as Trump cracks down on illegals currently in the United States. So the rationale that's being offered in that instance for why there are these tariffs being imposed by proclamation doesn't make sense. And there are other instances. For example, birthright citizenship is another case where, as we started this program, you rightly pointed out the Constitution provides that immigration, naturalization are federal jurisdiction. The Constitution provides, and the 14th Amendment provides, that anybody who's born in the U.S. is an American. And you can't get rid of that by simply signing a proclamation. The courts have come out and said, no, that doesn't work. So, what can I tell you? Mounting concern is the way I would put it in terms of what's happening in this field at the moment.
Given our United States history, what does exactly, and I'm just going to read here the 14th Amendment. And I was actually on a radio show years ago, and I was on with an incredibly bright Yale Law School professor who's written a lot about the Constitution. And one of the major questions is, did the framers of the 14th Amendment envision the incorporation doctrine to begin in the 20th century? Would they have thought, and it gets into the procedural versus the substantive due process. Like the procedural would have been basically the state has to treat everyone regardless. And then when you get into substantive, you're getting into like, are there these fundamental rights that have to be recognized as laid out in the Bill of Rights? And he kind of argued he saw the procedural. So post-Civil War, his example would be if there was a particular right, privilege, whatever, and it wasn't afforded to black Americans as it was to white Americans, et cetera, that would be clearly a misappropriation of law or rights because of race. But the question of then can we say that you have a Fourth Amendment right as laid out in the Bill of Rights, which did not apply to the states? As a matter of fact, it was in 1833, Barron versus Baltimore, and I actually brought that up in a history class one time. Somebody said, well, are you trying to tell me the Bill of Rights didn't apply? And I said, well, actually, in Barron versus Baltimore, there's a guy that sued the governor of Maryland. He sued the mayor of Baltimore because he had a wharf and they affected the currents or something, and he sued under the Takings Clause. And John Marshall said, hey, you're barking up the right tree. Nice argument that it's a Fifth Amendment state, but it doesn't apply because you're suing the state of Maryland and the Bill of Rights doesn't apply. Now, so then the question becomes, does it apply later? And does all of this language, and I'm looking here at, let's see, I think it's in, I'm going to make sure I'm right on this. Exactly what the language is okay, so yes, Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of, and this is another due process clause, persons of life, liberty, or property without the process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Now, as lawyers, we're taught statutory interpretation, plain language, get into the history sometimes. What do they really mean? I don't know if someone in 1868 drafting this is really addressing any more than we have a group of people who have been, with the 13th Amendment 3 years prior, they've been freed. So now we have to address the Dred Scott decision, which says black people don't have any rights with, the white society has to recognize. So there has to be an address. Well, Lincoln said with the Emancipation Proclamation, I don't have the authority to end slavery. It's going to take a constitutional amendment. It comes later. So now 3 years later, you have this 14th Amendment. It's clearly addressing the status of people who had formerly been held as slaves. Would they have envisioned in 1972 that meant someone that came into the United States and was born? But the plain language is all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. Now, what does that mean? Does the language that goes on to say or naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction? So I guess there could be an argument that a person that has come across the border during a pregnancy and has child, that child has not been naturalized or was never subject to the jurisdiction. The born part's clear. So I think that's where it gets. Now, again, you're asking, and I think absolutely the question, can the president just sign an executive order? That is another whole history. How we become a country of executive orders and Congress not doing anything it's supposed to do is another whole slice. I don't even know if we're, 10% under the original Constitution? What's the percentage? The whole Constitution's not followed. So it brings up that point. I hope, though, because I hear in what you're saying, and I watched your other videos, and I'm like, I just got to tell you, I was very impressed by your slow-pulsed, even-handed, and your compassionate, which I think is wonderful. because I think this is a very complicated matter. But I do think a lot of Americans are scared of what's happened at our borders. But we want fairness. We do want fairness, and we do want some level of compassion.
Yeah.
Government, though, has to do justice, not necessarily compassion, but you can be compassionate in justice. So let me ask you, what's the next answer? Where do we go from here?
I love the way you painted the history. It's very insightful, and it's right the way you painted the history. I don't know. I'll say this. One of the basic rules that I follow in my life is there are some basics. One of the basics is be kind. I try to be kind. I have my own point of view, and I believe it strongly, but I also realize, and you as a lawyer will know, you can go to court, you believe you have a 100% case, there's no way you're going to lose.
Absolutely.
You come out of there and you lost. And other times you go to court, you think there's no way you're going to win this case, it's hopeless. And somehow you come out and you won. It's a turkey shoot in there. You just don't know. Law is like that. Like, when I went to law school.
No, I love that. I'm
That's sorry, I'm going to be kind of winding around to get. Okay, when I went to law school, I thought, okay, I'm going to go to law school, and all these people who are fighting in the Middle East or now in Ukraine, I'm going to prove them all wrong. I'm going to study the law, figure out what does the law say, and I'm going to write a memo on what is the law. And I'll go to them and I'll say, listen, you guys, stop fighting. Just read this memo. Here's the law. And they'll go,
right.
Well, why didn't I think of that? That's exactly right. This is what we got to do. But that's not human nature. Like, I didn't consider things like self-interest, national interest, greed, emotions, and all that stuff that come into these day-to-day events and how people, how the law evolves. What I find especially beautiful about the common law and our way of dealing with law is how the common law through the courts year after year evolved, and how the courts managed to adapt to new situations and come up with new laws, essentially court rules that have guided us. And we've come all the way from the Magna Carta, where the king's rights were restrained, and Parliament, and so on, and through the courts, essential civil rights and free speech and all these things, and then ultimately codified in the amendments and so on to the Constitution. We're in this process now too. This is what's happening, and you're right that there's this swinging thing, and we may have gone too far this way, and then now we're doing this. That's all part of it too. But there are certain disturbing elements, in my view, as to what's going on right now. I'm deeply troubled by the lack of common sense ethics and, for example, conflict of interest issues that should be plainly visible and acknowledged. The failure to where things kind of fell apart for me was this issue about I hate to bring this up, the election, the last election, not this election, but the one before, when people still say, well, that was a stolen election, and half the people in Congress are still saying that previous election was stolen. That's where I parted company with those people. I think you got to call a spade, and sometimes it may not be happy for you, or what you're facing is just the truth. Now, where did I pick this up? I just want to share where I picked this up. I spent 15 years of my life defending this Soviet political prisoner named Danilo Semotiuk. And I want to tell this story because I think it's valuable in terms of what we're talking about. When I was a young lawyer, young guy, I went to a conference in Washington, D.C., and it was an international conference on human rights. And I was in with a bunch of other lawyers. We're young guys, and we tried to put forward a resolution for the Congress to adopt about dissidents in the Soviet Union, and that they should be supported and the regime condemned for oppressing these dissidents. It didn't go anywhere. But when we finished and we were withdrawing from the conference, a guy named Humphreys came up to us and he said, "Hey guys, hang on. This was John Humphreys. He was an older guy, and he framed the United Nations Human Rights Declaration. He wrote the declaration." And he said, "Come on, let's give it another try." And we gave it another try, and the resolution was passed. And I was just so inspired that this guy took the time to, meet up with us young guys and encourage us in our desire to make the world right, to put forward our ideas and live by the principles that we believed in. And I remember flying back from that conference and picking up a Time magazine article. And in that article, there was this write-up about this guy named Danilo Shmuk, who was a Soviet political prisoner. And at that time, Amnesty International said he was the longest-serving political prisoner in the world. And he had been serving already 25 years when I read that article. This is in the 1970s. I thought to myself, oh my gosh, how could anybody survive 25 years as a political prisoner? So I vowed, I'm going to get in on this case and try and help this guy. And so I did. And it just turned out that a guy that went to law school with me in Vancouver had been retained by this Shmuk's family, who were Canadians, to try and get this guy out. So I worked with this guy. His name was Ray Cantillon, this lawyer. And for the next 15 years, not every day, but, we worked on the case, and Amnesty International was involved. And
Bob Dole,
the former guy, the senator who ran for president, Bob Dole was supporting this case. And there were all kinds of people all over the world, Japanese and Israelis and so on. And finally, in 1987, he got out, this Danilo Shmuk, and he flew out to Calgary, Alberta, and I had the chance to meet him there when he arrived. And, eventually I traveled with him to the ABA convention in San Francisco, where he was going to give evidence as a former Soviet political prisoner about the persecution of prisoners in the Soviet Union. And he was quite a character. For example, when we went for breakfast, I said, Danilo, what would you like for breakfast? Said,
who wouldn't, right? If you're in the U.S., right?
Yeah. Okay, Coca-Cola, here you go, Coca-Cola. Anyway, we went to this hearing, and so it's before the ABA convention, and we enter the room. We're late. We enter the room, and I see a bunch of other Soviet dissidents there testifying about human rights violations in the Soviet Union to a panel of ABA lawyers who wanted to hear what's going on to make a decision about a resolution they were going to pass at the Congress. And as we entered the room, when Danilo Shmuk entered the room, all those dissidents looked over at him, and there were about maybe 24 of them. And they all stood up in unison. They stood up, recognizing him, because he had spent, I think it was 45 years in Soviet concentration camps. 45 years. So I asked him, I said, what's the deal here? What separated you from all these other people who were in the camps and so on? How could you survive all this and stay true to your principles? And his principles were very simple. He was for freedom for himself, freedom for his nation, and freedom for all nations, to pursue their lives in the way they want, basically. And he said, unlike others, there were cardinal values and there were spiritual values, is the way he put it. I abide by my core spiritual values, and I was not prepared to compromise them no matter what. Core spiritual values. And and these other guys were prepared to compromise on their spiritual values and their ethical values for the sake of carnal pleasure or
Right.
freedom from pain. And he described himself in this way. He was a former communist, and he says, I was a communist, but I was the kind of communist that was prepared to go to jail for my convictions, but not the kind of communist who jails
That's really
others for
interesting.
their convictions. Yeah. So that guy influenced me in terms of my thinking, in terms of, like, look, I'm no saint. I make mistakes, and I try to, pay for my mistakes. But I do believe in ethics, and I believe, conflict of interest is a big deal as far as I'm concerned. Big conflict of interest, not little ones, but, well, even little ones. But you can't be in a conflict of interest, and I don't know if you've ever.
I
Forgive
enjoy
me,
it.
I'm running off all over the place. Look, I got involved in an estate at one time. It was a big, clash of people in an estate. I was one of the parties. And in that estate, I had a personal interest, like a economic interest.
Right.
So it was
Right.
either I get it or somebody else gets it kind of interest. And all of a sudden, what are so clear to me in terms of the dividing lines and the ethical, parameters of what I am to do became so rubbery and fuzzy because of my own personal interest in the matter that I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, it's hard when you're in a conflict of interest to see what's right. That's something that
And
really
when you're
gotta
saying the
guard
conflict of
against.
interest, are you talking
And
about
one,
something relative to the administration now in this entire? And what would that be exactly?
yeah. Well, an example might be if you're making like,
Hmm.
I don't know what it is, 75 million a year from the United States government, Department of Defense, and you're investigating spending, expenditures of the department. I'm not sure that you can do that
Are you
without
meaning like Elon
being in a
Musk?
conflict of interest.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. And
You're,
I've heard that argument. And I think it's a valid
yeah,
one. If he's
that,
in the weapons or manufacturing of weapons industry, and he's the guy tearing down. Now, I do think the
yeah,
American people, and that doesn't mean they're wrong, because they could certainly be 51% deciding something doesn't make it right, or 51 or more. But I've always
yeah.
had the gut feeling there must be massive amounts. I actually had a gentleman on yesterday, and he brought up Frederick Bastiat in the Law. Now, that was a book that was amazingly influential to me because he opens with the law perverted. When the government is doing evil, it's plunder. If you use the government to pad your own pockets, the only thing government can do that is legitimate is the same thing you can do, and that's the right of self-defense. So collectively, all government should do. And it's an Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand was asked one time, 25 words or less, what's the
Yeah.
function of government? Protect individual rights, life and property from force and fraud from others. And if you flesh that out, I used to teach
Wow.
criminal justice classes, and I'm like, what does that mean? I'm like, you're walking down the street, somebody hits you over the head, they take your wallet. What have they done? They've affected your person, they've affected your property. So if there's a maker of right
Yeah.
and justice in the collective, it is to prosecute and make you whole to whatever degree. Return your money, punish the wrongdoer, but it's not to fund this,
Yeah.
that, and the other when the people going to Congress, they're making 176K and they all end up being multimillionaires. How the hell is that happening? So we've seen it happen over
Yeah.
time. And another point he
Exactly.
made, I'm a big fan of Ron Paul, and the gentleman I was talking to said a few years ago, he's the only member of the House that wants to
Oh, yeah.
vote against the resolution to give money to Mother Teresa. So it's a 434 to 1 vote, and people are looking at him like, what the hell's wrong with you? And he goes, I'll write the check. He personally wrote the check. And then there's his famous Davy Crockett that in the 1833, there's a fire in, I think, a section of D.C., and the Congress people said, hey, we got to fund the rebuilding. And he goes, I just got a letter from a constituent, and it said, it's not your money. It's not for you in Congress to do sweet things for people. It's taxpayers' money. You want to do it, fund it yourself. And Ron Paul literally did that. He goes, I'll vote for the resolution to honor Mother Teresa, but I'm not going to write a check at the taxpayer's expense. If we want to do that, I'll write the check, which he was willing to do. So that's what I'm saying. I think that we have a sense that something's crooked. But go ahead, sir.
Just a comment on that particular position.
Yes, sir.
Ron Paul pays taxes. So some of the money that's being paid is Ron Paul's money. So those people who
they didn't say help her.
Help
I don't think it was so much help her cause. It was send her money because she's a nice lady and does nice things.
Yeah. Okay, so those people who said that, in part they're right in the sense that the money they're
but I just don't think I'll find in the Constitution supporting Mother Teresa for any clause. Again, stroke checks. Free people can stroke checks. I just don't think it's a function of government. And it doesn't stop at Mother Teresa and this. Then it becomes, let's do something else for some other people halfway around the world that might not really. Not only is it not in the interest, I'm a strict constitutionalist, and if it's not in there, you don't do it. But go ahead.
Okay. I'm not going to argue Mother Teresa. I once saw Mother Teresa live. I have a story about that, but it's another story. I see your point. I don't dispute your point. I mean, there's a limit on what government should be spending money on. But where are we going with this? An example of where, for example, today I'm very concerned. I read just recently that the new guy who's in charge of defense went to Europe and said, apparently he's taken a position, in the war regarding Ukraine and Russia's invasion, this is not something we should be spending money on. You guys go ahead, but we're not going to spend any money on that. I'm concerned about that because I see it as a self-defense kind of argument, that even though it's over there, this is kind of off the topic of immigration, but allow me just to carry on here. In 1994, I'll make it relevant for you right away. In 1994, Ukraine, at the end of the division of the Soviet Union, dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine ended up with the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, strategic and tactical nuclear weapons. And the question was, what do we do about this? And President Clinton was then in power, and they called a conference in Budapest, and they said, hey, this can't be. We got to get you to surrender your weapons, and we'll guarantee your sovereignty and independence. So you surrender your weapons to Russia, and we will guarantee your sovereignty and independence. And that's what happened. Ukraine surrendered its weapons, and the United States, the UK, China, and France, as well as Russia, signed this Budapest Accord, and Russia promised to honor and respect Ukraine's independence. Well, 10 years now, it's not been honoring 10 years. It's 3 years, just coming up 3 years that it invaded Ukraine, and it's not honoring its commitment. And the U.S. is in the same boat. So this is not a charitable thing. This is not like Mother Teresa. This is a commitment, a promise that the United States made and these other countries made to defend Ukraine against what's happening here. And to put it in broader terms, from a legal point of view, we fought 2 world wars. World War I, 30 million people dead. World War II, 50 million people dead. Largely over one issue, borders and sovereignty of nations. And it's held after World War II, the United Nations, the Helsinki Accords, this Budapest Accord, and so on, has protected Europe by virtue of the fact that people honored this pledge of respecting borders until this invasion going into Ukraine. And now we're in a mess because our defense secretary
Well, I mean, I
They're
think
not going
there's
to
also
fund
the other argument that
Ukraine.
many Americans feel like, look, I mean, everything I have goes back to Jamestown, so my family history and tree is about as American as it gets. So I look at history, and
Yeah.
there's certainly an argument that what the founders did was treasonous. They're taking on the king. They could have all been hanged for that, right? So but when you win the revolution, you come back and say, hey, we were on the right side. There's certainly the American Civil War is fought to this day. The Spanish-American War, was that really right? The Mexican-American War, was that really right? World War I, many people believe America stays the hell out of it. There's probably a better peace. America tipping the scales might not have been the smartest thing to do.
No.
World War II, I saw an historian getting ripped apart. You probably saw it in the news recently that says there was a lot of mistakes made. That war didn't have to happen. And then he's questioning some of the leadership at the time. And you can't question Churchill or Roosevelt or, even Stalin. Everybody there is sort of what's sainted almost in history. But I wrote my master's thesis on the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
And I think Oswald did it. I don't know why he did
Oh.
it or who he was involved with. That's another whole show. But in doing that,
Yeah.
I thought the opening of Eugene Jarecki's Why We Fight in 2004, which was a documentary on kind of how United States sticking their nose in everything has led to a lot of our blowback and issues. And then at the start of the movie JFK, in both of those films, the opening is Eisenhower's Beware the Military-Industrial Complex. He wanted to say the military congressional industrial complex. And his handler was like, whoa, 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 you can't take on Congress. You can only, come on, Dwight, you can only go so far. But what is he? He is a graduate of West Point, kind of the middle of the class. It's interesting. All the stars, the guys that were 5 stars were in the middle, and the guys at the top were full colonels. But he's this class of West Point. He's about ready to be, as they say, rifted out as a full colonel, not going to make general grade. The war starts. He accelerates from brigadier general to this creation of the 5th star in 48 months. So he's a 5-star general, supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe. He goes on to be supreme commander of NATO forces. He's a president of Columbia University and a 2-term president. And he's saying the old plowshares to swords and back is gone. We're not turning the factories back into peacetime production. We have become a military state. And beware of this. And I know I saw one of his, it was his son or his daughter, or maybe I think his son was a brigadier general. I think his son said that Eisenhower was always upset with Truman about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He didn't think it was necessary. He thought it was Truman's play to say, hey, Soviet Union, we'll drop one of these. Check this out. Look what we have. I don't know, because the counter is always, it saved 500,000 American lives. We didn't have to have an invasion. Russia was already in. The Soviet Union was already in. So I don't know how quickly the war would have ended. But there's a lot of nuance. You know that. There's a lot of nuance. And there's a lot of division even in history. But something I said to the gentleman yesterday will always stick with me. I used to do talk radio with a Marine Corps Vietnam vet. And this is one of my favorite people in the world. Taught me a lot about a lot of things in life. And he told me about what it was like to be in Vietnam as a veteran. And I'll never get over how the American government lied to the American people. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution, all that's a lie. So Johnson runs on, and when I did my thesis on the Kennedy assassination, September 2nd, 1963 is the first 30-minute CBS broadcast of the news. Cronkite goes to Hyannisport, Kennedy's up there for Labor Day, and they flash on the screen, Americans in Vietnam, 16,500. American dead, 47. September 2nd, 1963. Johnson runs on, Goldwater's a warmonger.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to send American boys to Southeast Asia to do what Asian boys do for themselves. Then, oopsie, Gulf of Tonkin, he escalates the war, sends 500,000 troops, and 58,000 are killed. Somewhere in Des Moines, Iowa right now, there's a mother and father with a precious baby boy. And here's the thing I told McCreaney. I'm watching that 20 years after D-Day, June of 1964, Eisenhower and Cronkite go to the beaches of Normandy. They get in a Jeep, they're riding around 20 years after D-Day. And when Eisenhower talks about sending thousands of young men to their death, he gets choked up. And I'm thinking, that's the guy I want to be president.
Yeah.
I want him to be president. Right.
Yeah,
And I
me
think
too.
there's something about
Me too.
Americans. We're tired of American kids being killed all over the world. And I respect everything you're saying. I know that you're a fine man. I can see that. But I think Americans are sick and tired. And this is part of the message that's been sent. Stop sending our kids. Because who are the kids? They're the
Yeah.
poor. They're the kids without really options. Yeah,
Hold it, though. What you're missing
I know
is
that.
America's not
I know
sent
that.
one
But I think,
soldier to
right.
Ukraine.
No,
That's the
okay,
way it
okay,
should
and I
be.
no, and I
That's the
do
way it
get
should
that
be.
if even if a administration's misguided, because there would have been an argument maybe, hey, Ukraine, keep your weapons, defend yourself, and not get in the middle of it and say no, surrender it to Russia. That maybe that's the better answer. Maybe Clinton was wrong to take that
Yeah, yeah.
view.
Yeah, but
I get
now the
it.
problem
No, I
is
get
you
that
make a
part of it.
promise, you keep. That's why we're that's why we're stuck now. Well, we're not stuck because there's people saying, well, our new Secretary of Defense is saying, well, we're not paying anything.
Well, and all I'm
That's like,
saying is,
well, it's your problem. But next time you have a nuclear arm, like
mhm.
all these guys, like North Korea and all these, these butchers out there, they're all thinking, okay, here we go, forget disarmament and let's just blow
Yeah,
up the
I think
world
though,
kind of
from the
thing.
American
I
standpoint,
don't
all
know.
I'm
I mean, that's
saying is I understand that your background and situation could be very sensitive to something like that. But I think what Americans are feeling
yeah.
or have been feeling is let's stop being the policemen of the world. And again, if that's a 1993-94 resolution, why the hell are we ordering another country to release their nuclear arms to another country? Why are we in that position? I think is
They're not ordering. They
no, I'm not.
agreed. If
Okay,
you
all right.
do this
Again,
for
you're right.
us,
The terminology would be
what
poor
we'll
not
do
to
for
say
you.
ordered, but there might be an argument that we ought
Yeah.
to leave other countries alone. But I know that there has been this idea post World War II, I think,
No, no,
that America has to rule everything and call all the shots. And there's a certain amount.
no, no. What
Mm,
America is doing is protecting itself. Like in that instance, they said, there's a country out there with a nuclear arsenal that's the third largest in the world. We want to protect ourselves. So here's what we'll do. We'll promise you if you give
but
up your
what we're
nuclear
saying
arsenal,
though
we'll
is we would be
protect
then
you.
releasing the
So they
arms
give it up.
to the country we spent a Cold War with for half a century. That's what I'm saying, though. Isn't
Well,
that?
that's
I mean, if it
insanity.
goes from
That's
Ukraine to Russia, is that really such a
but
strategic move on the part of the United States? Okay,
no, it's not. But that's the promise they made. Now I'll tell you
right.
another strategic mistake that it's going to make. They're going to say, "Well, you know what? Hands off. You guys play. Go ahead, do whatever you want." And guess what? American boys and girls are going to die in Europe, and it's coming soon. That
Yep.
Article 5 is okay. You're going to break up NATO? Okay, go ahead, fight in
Well,
NATO. We're not
That's
fighting.
another
You go ahead,
interesting.
fight.
Yeah,
Fight your war.
yeah,
Let
yeah.
me let me just
No, 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 no.
say one other thing, and then I won't push it.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of World War II, over Berlin, I just happened to be looking at a book. It's called Checkmate in Berlin. And the concern of the Allies was that Stalin's going to take over
Mm-hmm.
all of Europe. All of Europe. And there was this, checkers game or chess game going on in Berlin as to whether they'll be able to
Sure.
stop Stalin from taking over all of Berlin, not all of Europe. That's where we're at right now with Putin, Mr. Putin. If we give up, it's like if we just throw in the towel, go ahead, do whatever you want.
Do you really think
Putin's
that
going to
that's what he's
occupy
after?
all of Europe, and
Okay, okay.
guaranteed. Like he's declared it. That's what he wants to do. Like
No, no, I don't think
okay,
that at
maybe
all.
I'm a wacko. Maybe you think I'm
I don't know. You
crazy.
have a much more. You're more
I,
steeped
I,
in the
I'm,
history than
I'm
I am on
telling you,
that. I'm
he's
just.
declared. He's
Yeah.
declared. This is what he wants. Like he wants to take. First of all, he wants to restore the Soviet Union the way it was, which was all of Eastern Europe. And this guy, forgive me. I don't want to sound like some crazy guy with some kind of conspiracy mindset or whatever.
Okay.
Talk to Bill Browder. Ask him about Putin. And here's what Bill Browder, who knows him intimately, is the great guy. Great thing about him is his father was in the Communist Party. I think he was the president of the Communist
Right.
Party of America. I think at least he was in the Communist Party. And this guy went the other way. He's a big capitalist. He's a unbelievable guy. And he lost a lot of money. And Putin killed his lawyer, Magnitsky, and all this stuff. Bill Browder says the big deal about Putin is he stole everything he could steal in the Soviet Union, well, in Russia, and he and his cronies, now that they've stolen everything, have to have a war because they have like all this theft, all this stuff that they've stolen, and that's the only way to keep the attention off them and onto something else. I believe that, I think he's right on that, and there's no end to this thing. Call a spade a spade. If you think I'm crazy, just tell me. But here's what I'm thinking.
Hegseth, yeah.
This guy Hegseth, or whatever his name is, he says, our attention has to be on China, not on, well, if you let Ukraine down and Putin takes over Ukraine, believe me, China will be in Taiwan.
I've heard that argument, sure.
And now we're fighting a war in Taiwan. And North Korea will be in South Korea the day after you. Like, it's an endless. The world is ugly. It's full of people who are terrible, like tyrants. And these tyrants, like Putin, like Xi, like these guys in Iran, and all, these guys in Venezuela. There's a club. This woman, Anne Applebaum, wrote about this recently. She's a great author. By the way, I want to say, before I forget, I loved Ayn
Pretty
Rand,
phenomenal mind.
Ayn Rand. And as a matter of fact, I was in New York, and I went to see her. I knocked on her door, but she wasn't
I had a friend that actually
But I
studied
went to
under
see.
her.
I wanted to meet her.
Knew her.
Did you? I had a friend who knew her very well, and also her buddy.
Peikoff.
What's his name? The psychologist. That's a great.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. No. Pinkoff is.
Oh,
another one,
okay,
but
yeah. I'm not thinking the name right now. Yeah, but right.
Whatever his name is, I forgot. But anyway, I met him in person, and anyway, I'm sorry. Where was I going? Anyway,
Sure.
I got out what I wanted to say. Now, who knows? Am I right? I don't know.
No.
Maybe I could be wrong. I'm not God. That's the way.
Yeah, I
the
just
world,
think that
I'm calling it the way I see it.
No.
You think I want you to get into war?
I get
No,
it.
I don't want.
And maybe I'm naive. I'm just saying that part of that Eugene Jarecki, Why We Fight, it was a takeoff on the Frank Capra movies of, they were doing the indoctrination films about the soldiers going into World War II. And he used that. And one of the guys he has on, it was 2004, he opens with Eisenhower's address about the military-industrial complex. And then he has a guy on that was a CIA type for 10, 12 years. And he said, we have a thing in the agency we call blowback. It's screwing around in parts of the world. And the guy I listen to now, by me, it's always like, by what authority do you do what you do? Don't tell me you got 51% of the vote and then you decide to tell me, it's like two wolves and a sheep. I'm not a democracy guy. I'm a law and order guy in the sense that, back to Bastiat, if the government is doing protection of my individual rights, fine, but I have every right to protect myself.
Okay. Well, I'm lined up with you, by the way, in this area, because I'm also very disturbed about what the hell's going on over there in Washington.
But a guy that I listen to all the time now, that a friend of mine said, hey, you got to listen to this guy 5 years ago. So I started listening to this guy, and he was New Yorker, kind of lefty, like everybody, or socially liberal. And he said he was watching the Republican debates. And Giuliani's talking, getting mired in something else. And Ron Paul said the term blowback. And he was like, whoa, let me listen. And he's given him chapter and receipts for everything the U.S. government screws up in. And now look at Ron Paul. He was military. He was a doctor that served in the military, was overseas, in combat, all of this. He used to deliver babies at a Catholic church hospital for $1 a day. The guy lives it. He's the real thing. And I started following him. Another guy that I dearly loved in that same era was Alan Keyes. And I would listen to Keyes and I would listen to Paul. And I'm like, why do they get traction? Like, why don't they get, why is it the same families? Why is it the same connected people from the same colleges and universities and blah, blah, blah? And they're all getting filthy rich at the expense of Americans. And I think people have looked at this for quite some time. And I do want to address this too, a little bit of pushback. When you said the thing about the 2020 election, I'm somewhat agnostic about anything. I think the 60 election's dirty. I think there's plenty to show that Kennedy-Nixon was a dirty election. I think it's always gone on. Lyndon Johnson was famously landslide Lyndon because he won by 13 votes the Senate election. It was precinct 13 got dropped in with some votes. It was like 200 people that voted in alphabetical order and all for him, So I know that elections.
I know he used to get.
That's a great story. I did see a historian saying that he talked to a Johnson guy and he goes, "Was there ever a paper trail?" He goes, "Never." And another thing that Johnson was big on, he died worth $23.5 million in 1973 dollars. And nobody can do the math. How do you, So he was the chairman of the defense industry as a senator. He was chairman of that committee. And they said another thing he would do is he set up Lady Bird and all these television and radio stations. And a part of the way he got wealthy is he didn't want to accept cash at times. So he's like, send me 4 TVs, send me a convertible car. And people sent things to the radio station. And anyway, so with all this corruption that I've kind of seen over time, or I feel like has been going on in 2020, something I'll tell you always sticks in my mind. It's 2019, and I'm watching a couple of talking heads on CNN. I'll never forget this. I'll probably get called on this. I'm going to have to produce the tape. But anyway, I'm watching the news one night, and I hear a woman, 2 pretty faces, male and female, and she's like, unemployment's down, the stock market's, how in the hell did we get this guy out of office? Just like that. That's like her down the middle journalistic commentary. And the guy goes, what if the economy crashed? Like if everything fell apart, right? So when spring and the COVID thing hit, the first thing that went through my mind is they're going to blame every death on Trump, and they're going to run this throughout the election. And the moment that Biden was inaugurated, they pulled the death scroll off the bottom. It's a fact. I mean, it's what happened. So I'm watching this. I did not vote for Trump in 2016, but when he won and I saw the reaction, because I'll go back. I didn't vote Obama or Romney. Who the hell cares? They're the same person. I didn't vote Obama versus McCain. Why the hell care? They're the same person. Bush Gore didn't matter to me. None of these ever mattered to me because I thought it's the same thing. But when Trump won and I saw the blowback on him, I'm like, wait a minute. He's on to something. Like they're reacting in a way. So when the 2020 election came, some of the things I've researched is if you look at Article 2 of the Constitution, it says the electors are selected by the state legislature. So they're going to set the law. And then you had judges like, well, because of COVID, we're going to have to do some different type of mail-in ballots. I think Wisconsin had a rule to issue, I think I'm correct on this, to issue a mail-in ballot. You had to have signatures and identification of the person request. They're just willy-nilly sending them out, and they're coming back. And we do have this. What did Biden get? 81.5 million votes to Trump's more than he got in 2016 vote. And now this vote's nowhere near that total. And I've seen the numbers. You can see it. When you go back 2008, 2012, 2016, 2020, 2024, the Democrats are almost completely level across the board, except for 2020. There's a huge spike. Mm-hmm. Republican votes are pretty similar. Trump got a spike this time and actually won the popular vote. I've seen enough. I actually saw a documentary, too, where a journalist in Georgia went to 5 nerds, stat people, and said, look at it. 2 were agnostic, 2 were Democrats, 1 was Republican, whatever. And one guy had a slide rule in his pocket. He goes, I've looked at the numbers. They don't make sense to me. There were things in the voting that seemed irregular. So when you say, I get it, whether Trump was wrong, whether Trump should have never gone out there on January 6th and ran his mouth, whatever, I get it. Where I think he really was in bad violation was with the 2 Senate seats in Georgia still up for grabs. He kind of pooped on the whole system and said it's not even worth, and there was a lot of Republicans upset about that. But I do think a lot of Americans looked at the times and went, something seems kind of irregular here. It just doesn't. And given the fact that in 2016, I heard Trump's illegitimate, Trump didn't really win, Putin put him in office. And I used to think, and I didn't vote in 2016, did I go to the ballot and I'm going to vote for Trump, and all of a sudden something Putin hit me in the ear and I went, oh, it's Hillary, I got to go with Hillary, or I went to vote for Hillary, I'm sorry. And then all of a sudden something that I heard in social media on the way, no, you pretty much had your mind made up. And I don't I never got the whole Russia collusion, and then that whole argument falls apart. So I do think a lot of Americans looked at the overall picture. This is what you just saw with the past election. They tried to take him to prison, or they tried him, in the courts. There's a mysterious shooting in the ear. There's another attempt at the golf course. So I think a lot of people were looking at it like, something the hell is going on here. I'm just saying, I think anyone could rationally look at the system and say, it doesn't make him an angel. I'm not saying he's some kind of angelic figure, but what I'm saying is, I think a lot of Americans could look at this and like, this whole thing looks kind of dirty. And that could make him question what happened in 2020.
Okay, I get, I understand better why people might be thinking there's some issue there related to the election. I don't know, you and I are both lawyers. The way I look at it is he went to courts.
Yeah, and I heard a lot of the reason why is they said the doctrine of latches, that he literally did not attack the vote before the vote. And that's why this time, I talked to some attorneys that said they were going precinct to precinct, already putting in the paperwork to be in front of that, because they were literally told like, hey, yeah, maybe you really have an argument here, but there's a doctrine of latches and your timing's not right and you didn't really make the point when you were supposed to, like prior to the election. So.
Yeah. This is, I think this is something historians can properly sort out, and I'm not sure what the right, maybe one day history will prove that argument.
No.
Right,
and look, you may
I'm
be
wrong,
right.
and
It
I'm
may
happy.
have been all I'm saying is, I think a lot of Americans looked at the factors, the timing of things, and said, and again, this is weird, and I'm not saying it's any basis in fact, but when I heard those CNN types, or whatever station, MSNBC, fill in the blank, I think it was CNN, but they literally did say, the guy's being successful. It's Christmas 2019. How the hell do we get him out of office? And the guy goes, boom, light bulb. What if we have an economic downturn? Like, what if the whole country gets shut down? I mean, and right then, I'm telling you, I swear before all things sacred, I went, oh hell, something's getting ready to happen. Something's going to happen. That's my feeling at the time. I got nothing to support on it other than a gut feeling. But I felt like it was preparing the public mind for what's coming. In some sense. They're letting the cat out of the bag, call it what you...
Well, let's put it this way. I'm learning a lot from you, and I hope I shared a few thoughts that, were helpful to you and your thinking. You know what we need to do?
In fairness to you, I want you to, I think that I do want to bring up one other subject with you on the immigration thing. Doing my research, I think the criticism that our immigration laws historically are racist is absolutely true. Would you not agree with that? Well, Chinese Exclusion Act,
where you're going with
and then following
in
the 20s, it kind of seems to be, if it's not particular Europeans of particular backgrounds, ethnicity. So that has been a criticism. In 65, Johnson signs a new order. But what I've seen historically is there's kind of a 100-year lull where there's really nothing on immigration until the Chinese Exclusion Act. And it was saying a particular group of people could not come for 10 years. followed by more, and that has been a criticism that there is a history.
There was,
Yes.
after World War II, the Jews were excluded. It was a resettlement package, and Jewish people were blocked from coming into the United States, as another example. So there's no doubt about it. There was racism, from the legislative point of view. There were instances where
And of
it
course,
was out and out racist. But like, we're human, I guess, is the way to cope with that. Like the great thing about America for me is historically, look, it was born out of kind of a genocide on the American Indians. It was born the whole black slavery issue, and the imperial battles with Mexico and taking territory from Mexico and imperialism.
No doubt.
I mean, there's a lot of bad history in the United States. There's a lot of damn good history in the United States. If you ever read, like Ulysses Grant, for me, is a big hero. Lincoln is a big hero. The fact that Johnson put through the entire civil rights package that Kennedy had put forward before he died, to me, was a spectacular achievement. Obama's election, to me, despite I didn't like Obama's foreign policy and so on, but the mere fact that he got elected, to me, meant a lot in terms of what it said about America and what can be done in America. I met, Martin Luther King Jr.'s widow at the UN in the 1970s. I had a half-hour opportunity to talk to her. I was very inspired by that. I met Andrew Young, similarly there. Now, they wouldn't remember me and, like, who the hell is Andy Semotiuk? But what matters to me is I had a chance to in person feel and talk to them about their lives and what happened with them. And that motivated me, it inspired me. So, I'm not down on America. I love America. I don't love everything about America. There's some things I don't like about America. But overall, I mean, what other country has got such a, has there been such a good struggle for what's good in life that you can show? You can talk about the French Revolution, but it was a big slaughter, and the Russian Revolution was a disaster, and all that. America. There's a lot of good in America. So, you gotta, now I don't know how we're gonna survive this next round here. What's gonna happen, we'll see. But I'm sitting here on pins and needles every night watching TV. What's next? Oh my gosh, we're talking about Gaza and we're talking about Greenland and Panama. I'm thinking, what? I don't know about you.
No, and it's a pendulum swing. And like I said, I think that sometimes pendulum swinging kind of brings about some equilibrium. I mean, I really think some of the good years were the Clinton years. After people thought he went crazy left, he loses the midterm, him and Gingrich. And I was listening to a commentator the other day. He was like, I was in a back room one time, and Gingrich or Clinton were back there punching each other in the arm, playing around, hugging each other, drinking beers together. He goes, I was like, that's really the relationship? Like, these guys are on the same page. But what it did was it brought about, I think, some stability in the government didn't shift right or left too much. And it became kind of some pretty good years, right? The tech industry's growing, we kind of go through a period of relative calm. Oh, absolutely.
Economically, he did
absolutely.
Pretty good.
But he didn't swing as far left as he might have thought he could with that shift. I mean, the Republicans hadn't been in control of the House in 40 years? And at times, a couple of times the Senate. So I do think divided government is when we're probably generally our best because they don't do anything.
I think so too.
That's what I'm kind of saying. If it kind of shuts them down from really getting enough horsepower to do much of anything, we're all we all benefit. And so I'm sure in the midterms in 2026, there'll probably be some swing back.
Let's hope a bit.
Well,
anyway.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like the show, subscribe and hit your notification button to get an update when we post another episode. See you soon.